Eesha Shah, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Glad to start. All right. Yeah, so why don't you tell everyone who'll be watching this a little bit about yourself?
I am currently in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where I'm originally from. My family has been here since I was about 7, but I'm a recent college graduate. I got graduated this past year from Carleton, which is in Minnesota. But before that, I went to high school in New Hampshire to a boarding school or a prep school. And I think it's provided me with a lot of unique experiences.
That's interesting. Well, then, let's get started. All right. So, I want to start off with just something that is just been going around my head. I you sent me your resume. You sent me all these wonderful list of applications. People have heard that just now. Carleton College, Phillips Exeter Academy. It's wonderful. But considering you are the way you are, there had to have been like, what was the foundational experience in your childhood that made you into who you are today?
I think that there isn't necessarily one experience or
Mhm.
event that presented me with who I am today, but I think that it's all cumulative. I think growing up in Iowa, my parents were always looking for new experiences for me to uh, provide academic enrichment and also enrichment in other ways. I always was involved extracurricularly and in sports and all of that growing up. So I think my parents looking for all of those things for me to keep me engaged in more than just going to school and coming home made me always wanting to see what little bit more I could do. And my parents were a big part in deciding to go off to a boarding school. And I think that was pretty young for me. I was 13. So I think from that age, looking for something more to do in Iowa than what just comes to you naturally really encouraged me to look beyond what was first available to me.
Let's talk about that boarding school, right? Like, that's beyond even the sites of first available to you. That's just like very few people would even consider that as an option. What made you even consider applying to such an elite high school? Like it's a boarding school, it's way off in just like what is it? It's New Hampshire, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So it's Iowa to New Hampshire. That's a long trip. What made you consider applying? What made you able to go considering it was boarding? Like how do you work up that courage?
Sure. I think initially it wasn't even like, okay, I want to go to a boarding school. It wasn't like that. It was more like, oh, what are the opportunities that are available past the high school in my town? Because academically, I was already taking high school level classes in middle school. And then once you get to high school, a lot of what's available is taking the local college level courses. So looking past that and seeing what's
What
available even past that. And so me and my parents, we started looking at different schools that were prep schools or boarding schools. And initially, we looked at a couple of schools in Chicago. And I interviewed a couple places in Chicago. And then we started doing interviews on the East Coast. And at that point, I hadn't decided that I want to go. This is what's going to happen. In fact, I think I didn't really have a good sense of exactly what that kind of school would be like until I was starting to tour and interview and apply to those places. And after that, I think once I had seen the opportunities that were available at maybe 5 or 6 of the schools I had toured on the East Coast, uh, I was really excited about the opportunity because it wasn't just like, this is going to be academically engaging. It was this is going to be enriching to me as a person even greater than on the academic level, which obviously it was. So then once I was applying and I had a couple options, I think what me and my parents were thinking were I'm either going to go to what's the best available, or there wasn't really a point in going 5 hours away from home to Chicago to a school that was good, but not that much of it better than what was available here and what I could do. by doing summer camps or things like that, because going away from home was a big decision. So I think because the schools that I looked at, I love so much, that's why it became a serious opportunity rather than just something I was looking at.
Okay, so I get the consideration part, but this is a boarding school like Hogwarts, but minus the magic, which is the reason people go to Hogwarts. So you left home at age 13 and you're in a completely foreign environment. What was the experience like there? Like, how are the people there on a scale between down to earth and snobby? Where would you say they fall?
I think that initially people might think that you would expect snobby people at a place
Yeah.
like that. But the thing is, it wasn't that I was an outlier. Everyone was coming from
Okay.
my type of situation where they were looking for something more. And there was definitely a spectrum, people who had had parents who had gone to a school like this before versus people who hadn't at all or had never even heard of it. And then they were sought out through recruiting programs. So I think that because that range of people was there, it wasn't like I went into this school and I was the only one who had never considered this before or something like that. And because of that, people weren't snobby. They were just high schoolers who were excited. And I think there was also a sense of you were living with your best friends every day, especially by senior year of high school. I was roommates with one of my best friends, and my other two best friends lived on the same floor as me. So that opportunity is something that you don't really get in high school in your hometown.
Okay, so seems like you took to boarding decently well. Of course, there would have been the
Mhm.
probably, I'm guessing there would be the initial homesickness and all that,
Sure.
right? Like that can be avoided. But I want to know beyond that experience, what impact did going to Phillips Exeter's Academy make on you?
Sure. I think Exeter's big thing was that everything is Harkness based. And Harkness is the style of teaching where everything is discussion based. So, how classes work there is a table in each room. It's a big oval wooden table. And the teacher sits at the table with all of the students, usually 12 to 15 students, and everything is discussion based. English is discussion based, math is discussion based, everything is discussion based. So I think becoming a participant in a discussion like that, when it's every single day you're talking and learning how to listen to people and build off of what they're saying and their ideas, uh, I think made me a much more thoughtful person, a much more articulate person, a better writer, all of those things that come from an academic environment like that. I think it also made me a more creative thinker. For example, our math classes were based in the sense that everyone would do the homework, which was usually 6 to 8 problems, math problems, and come and then present how they did them in class. So there would be no lecture. There was no lecture, not one lecture in my 4 years at Exeter.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's that's okay, that personally sounds like an amazing educational experience.
Mhm.
It's that I somewhat see happening a bit more nowadays in English classes, and I think they're starting to adopt it some places or the other. You did what? I think like you were in regular public schooling from kindergarten through eighth grade, right?
Yep.
How would you compare like I guess Phillips Exeter versus Exeter? Exeter?
Yep.
Exeter, okay, versus your time at public school.
I don't think they're necessarily comparable.
Okay.
I mean, I think first of all, there's just the one thing about Exeter that you can't necessarily get at public school is that every single person there was wanting to be there because
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you can't say 100%, but not everyone wants to be in school every day. And
Definitely.
this is not to say that public school sucks or anything like that, because I think that there are a lot of opportunities that, especially in the school that I was in until middle school, they did a good job of trying to create opportunities for every student. But also, it wasn't the same as um, having to be an active participant in every class. And sometimes that was tiring in high school, but I think that was the main difference is I could take a much more passive role in how I was doing in classes in my middle school and elementary school experience and what I would assume high school would be like here. But you couldn't be passive in classes there.
Yeah, that's really funny. It's what all our teachers in public school are telling us to do, be an agent of your own learning. They're allowing us to be passive, but it seems like Exeter didn't really give you that chance, which from what I've heard from you so far is something that you definitely don't seem to regret. You seem to be grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one more thing that was really important is it taught me how to be a good participant in discussions, not just a participant. And I think because everyone was coming in new to this concept, especially freshman and sophomore year, they were teaching us how to be a concise speaker and how to listen to others, which I think without being taught is a hard skill to gain.
Okay. Okay. So it's not just about being a participant then. It's about being a good participant. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think yeah, it's like so Exeter's goal is really all about making people who can really just okay, it sounds like they're really about making sure that you can contribute, but even though it's only been about discussion so far, what we've talked about, I can't help shake the feeling that a school like that wouldn't just want you to contribute to discussion, but also to society. So like let's take the Phillips Exeter Society, just that small area. Would you say you left some sort of an impact on the school? And if you did, what would it have been?
I can't say that I left like some specific impact on the school, but I think that another big thing about going to a school like that is you're meeting people from everywhere with every experience. Um, I mean, my closest friends, one was from Florida, one was from New York, one was from California, one was from Texas. And I had people in my dorm from England or from Malaysia or from wherever else. And everyone came in with very unique experiences and life stories, and me included. And I think because everyone came in with those different experiences, even outside of the classroom, you were learning about how other people lived and what was important to them and what challenges they faced in their lives. And all of that, I think, creates a person better suited to live in a world apart from just their own. So I can't say that I made an impact specifically by doing such and such thing, but I think just by being an individual with my own unique life experiences and listening and interacting and being friends with people with their own life experiences, it created the community where everyone was learning from each other.
Okay, pushing off a little bit, like I just want to take that a little bit deeper. So diversity is a huge thing that's been going around recently, especially with in this 21st century. What are your own personal views on diversity?
Sure, I think that it's impacted a lot by my high school and my college experience. But I think often when we talk about it, it's very like it's something we need, but like why do we need it? And it does this, or we need to hit this quota. But in actuality, if you're talking to someone who doesn't understand a wide variety of other people, you can tell that it's just not the same um, interaction with the world. And I think personally, I grew a lot in my first 2 years because at Exeter and also at college, because then I was meeting new other people. But I think going outside of just my own little community, um, I learned a lot, and something that you can't learn by reading, and also much more naturally. And so I think diversity creates much more knowledgeable and empathetic people.
Okay, so yeah, diversity, it's something I've heard a lot, and it's something I'm only now starting to understand that it seems to be a type of learning that you definitely like that you got at the school, which is the kind of learning that you can't get from books, you can't get from, you have to go out there and really experience it. Did I get that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, it's not the only way to learn about other people. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of thought that you can put into it and try to be deliberate in how you, sorry, there was just a noise.
No worries.
You can be deliberate in learning about other people, but I also think it's a little bit easier if it's coming naturally. It happens a little bit more as it should.
Okay. And how can people really just try to bring in more diversity? Like, would you say when people are applying to colleges or looking for what, like, let's say you have a choice between two different high schools, how high, for you personally, would diversity have been as a factor when you were choosing a place to go?
I think initially, before I had that experience, I wouldn't have thought about it. As a 13-year-old, I can't say that that's what was at the top of my list. But um, I think now that I would consider it an important part, because it's more than just also learning. It's about creating communities within yourself, because diversity isn't even about people different than me. Sometimes it's also people similar to me. So I think having a diverse community means that every person has some sort of support system usually. So for example, if I were to go to high school here, or even at my job now, I would say I'm the only non-white individual at the place I work.
Mhm.
So that's just not the same experience. So I think going to a college where you're maybe the only non-white person, which is sometimes, you don't think about that, but then you get there and you're living and no one has similar experiences to you. And no one has similar life experiences, cultural experiences, cultural importances. So not just diversity in the sense of people being different than me. I think having people who are similar to me is really important too, because that's a part of diversity here too.
Definitely. Okay, so you mentioned diversity is about creating communities, and I know from what you've mentioned to me outside of this that you worked really hard on helping like with the South Asian community out in Carleton.
Mm-hmm.
Before I fully move into that, though, since we're moving on to diversity in college, which is something I really would like, I think you have some really interesting views on that. And I'd love to hear how that applies to college. We got to hit those questions everyone wants to know, the $52,659 per year question, or like just college tuition, all that stuff. What were your stats? Where'd you apply? Where'd you get in? And what was your overall admissions experience, especially since you have a unique story to tell coming from Exeter, right? It's like, what was the experience like applying from there and just all that kind of stuff?
Sure. I think I will be honest with you. I did try to really brainstorm and think about what my stats were, trying to remember, but I think 5 or 6 years after applying to college, it's not something that you consider every day.
Yeah.
I think I had taken the SATs, and I think I had ranked like high 90th percentiles in there. I don't remember my exact score now. At Exeter, the GPA is at an 11-point grading scale. It's not a 4-point grading scale. So I don't know how to convert, and I don't remember my exact GPA there either. But also the caliber of academics and the difficulty of getting what is an A is also harder. So colleges consider like an 11 and a 4 differently. It's
Yeah.
very rare that someone there would have what's the equivalent of a 4.0 GPA. So I think that my stats were good. I was able to kind of get into the places that I was pursuing. I remember that I applied to quite a few places, maybe 12 or 15. I remember that in the end, I ended up, my last four maybe were UNC, Carleton, Case Western, and Grinnell were the ones I was considering. I think I decided that I wanted to go to a smaller school with a more liberal arts experience, just because um, what I had enjoyed at Exeter was kind of exploring all different subjects and looking into what I enjoyed. Even if I was going down a specific path, I still think there's a lot of merit in exploring and learning outside of what will be your career, in making a more well-rounded human. So I think those were the final four schools I was applying, or I was accepted into, and then was deciding to go to. Yeah.
And what was the like? Would you say Carleton was more or less competitive than Exeter?
Um, I think that they were both similarly competitive in different different senses. I actually think that Carleton was maybe more outwardly competitive. I didn't really necessarily feel competition at Exeter, which is unexpected.
Yeah.
But I would say that maybe it's because we were in high school and people were really supportive of what we were doing, and maybe it was also the people I was surrounding myself with, which makes a big difference to everyone's experiences. But I think that I didn't necessarily feel like there was a super strong competitive spirit, um, like against each other at Exeter, in my experience. At Carleton, I would say that maybe there is a little bit more than what I felt in high school, but maybe it's also just because that's more recent. Exeter is now 4 years ago since I've graduated, more than that. Uh, but Carleton, I would say, especially in STEM fields, there's a little bit more of that. Oh, I did this, I did that. I'm doing this, I'm doing that kind of sense of competition.
Okay, so then how did this like kind of okay. So there was still an increase in competition. Did you face that as in like because you said it was mainly in STEM fields, and
Mm-hmm.
but correct me if I'm wrong, you went for an econ major, right?
Yep.
So did you really get affected by that as an econ major, or was it only in the STEM fields, or was it also going to be an econ?
I think that maybe I was slightly outside of what the typical um, econ, econ graduate would look like. My dog just. um, so I was maybe a little bit outside of that. So I think there was also some of that competition in econ, especially when it came to um, the last year or so, where people were looking at getting jobs and people were like, okay, I'm going into consulting or this or that. But I don't think it was so strong that you couldn't survive or it was hurtful or anything like that.
And what do you mean you were a bit like outside the scope of a typical econ major?
I mean, I was pre-med all the way through
Oh, interesting.
college. Yeah, it wasn't that I suddenly changed my mind or anything like that. It was something that I was sure of all the way through college. But I also really enjoyed econ, and being a science major isn't necessary to being pre-med. It makes it a little bit harder because for the MCAT or anything like that, you have to do extra classes and you have to do very varied classes between your major and pre-med. But it wasn't that I was focusing a lot of my energy on econ outside of the major. A lot of my extracurriculars were more STEM focused rather than economics focused, or I guess more science focused.
All right. I think that's looking to most of the time I wanted to spend on basic college apps, that kind of stuff. I want to transition back to diversity and your efforts because you spent a lot of time working towards that. So can you describe, so for a bit of context, could you just explain to the members of the audience and everyone out there what the Mosaic of South Asian Interests did?
Sure. I don't think that was necessarily diversity focused, but it was an organization that was just, usually most campuses have cultural organizations. So it was just the South Asian Cultural Organization on Carleton's campus. And I came in, and it wasn't that it had specific things. It was really just a place for South Asian students to meet and be within their cultural community and celebrate things like Diwali or Holi or any of those things, as well as just be around people with similar backgrounds as them, because that can be comforting and it can be fun to be around people who have that similar background to you.
And okay, so you were on the board for this like
Mhm.
kind of club, right? Would you say you interacted with the other cultural organizations on campus?
Sure, yeah. I think that during my time on board, the board was comprised of 4 people who were elected each year. And so I spent 2.5 years on board from the end of my freshman year, and then usually seniors try not to be on the board so new faces can come in. So from the end of my freshman year to the beginning of my senior year, I was on the board. And during that time, along with the other people who were on the board, we decided that we wanted to do more than just necessarily throw events or have fun things, but rather things that would promote growth within ourselves and within our club or make an impact. So part of that was interacting and having joint efforts with other cultural organizations on campus. That usually was either just a meeting or one time we did a dance with them, with other cultural organizations. Sometimes we had game nights. So pretty often we interacted with other cultural clubs.
So how would you say your experience on the Mosaic board and collaborating with other cultural organizations on campus, like how would you say that shaped your perspective and understanding of diversity and inclusion?
I don't think it was so necessarily deliberate that it changed or shaped my understanding on diversity. I think diversity comes very naturally, especially in those situations, but it was more in the sense of these are other people who similarly to us maybe aren't the majority on campus, especially going to college in the Midwest. And they have their own unique experiences, but also it's going to be fun to interact with them and to honestly just be friends with people who are not necessarily the exact same. And even though there are differences, there are a lot of similarities as well. So I don't think that interacting with other cultural organizations was so necessarily specifically tied to diversity or inclusion, but more just there are other people on campus and really you should be learning and interacting with different types of people.
All right. Branching a bit off diversity here, I just want to ask one question that popped in my head. You said you were making friends with people as you met people in different cultural organizations and just in general at college. Would you say you still keep in touch with them today?
I think that, well, first of all, it's only been about 6
Oh,
months since I
yeah.
graduated. So, I mean, uh, fair question though. I think that I definitely have people I'm super close to, like my closest friends, and we talk maybe once a week, at least to some of them. And then others will talk every once in a while. I know that I'm still in touch with my high school friends as well. So I think that's the things with friendships is you continue to maybe not interact in the same ways you did when you were talking to each other every single day for 6 or 7 hours because you lived on the same campus, but still you continue to be friends after graduation.
And okay, so Carleton isn't going to be like, it's not, it's not in Iowa, right?
No, it's in Minnesota.
Minnesota, perfect. And Exeter is in New Hampshire. How do you manage to maintain, like, so it's been 6 months and then 4.5 years, respectively, since you've graduated from them. And now I'm pretty sure the graduates from all these schools, they're branched out all over the country. I,
Yeah.
yeah. So how would you, like, how do you stay in touch and how do you keep those connections? Because oftentimes people, when they leave high school and college, those friendships drift away.
Yeah, I think a couple things is first, just social media helps a lot. Just knowing generally where people are in the world makes it a lot easier to be in touch with them, but also being proactive. And when you think of someone or when you remember something, maybe reaching out. I know that my high school friends, I've seen them a couple times since graduating just because we were going to be in the same place at the same time. One of my two of my best friends, they both went to college on the East Coast. My roommate was at Yale, and then my other friend was at Mount Holyoke, which is in Massachusetts. So my sophomore year of college, there was a conference for South Asian students all across the country happening at Yale. And so I was going with my college group. And so I ended up seeing two of my friends from high school just because we managed to work out seeing each other when we knew we were going to be in the same place at the same time. And then I just saw another friend from who's in Chicago now after graduation because we knew that it's only a 4-hour drive from where I am now. So just being able to be a little bit more proactive and being okay with continuing to stay in touch, even if you're not talking in the same way that you were while you were in high school or college.
Okay, that's really good to hear. So the way to basically one word way to keep all these relationships alive is just be proactive.
Yep.
All right, let's transition one more time. Um, so you also, okay, could you explain what your work, like your internship experience at Nega Energies, just in general, like what were the kind of things you did there? What was your main goal for yourself as you went into it? And how did you, like, how close did you get to meeting that goal?
Yeah, so a little bit of background knowledge. My sophomore year, I applied for a study abroad trip that was happening over winter break of the next year at Carleton. It was a opportunity to go to Ethiopia and work on a cook stove project. So a lot of the cooking that happens in rural and Ethiopia is on open fires, which produces a lot of biomass through charcoal cooking, and it can cause respiratory issues. It can also be problematic for the environment because you're cutting down a lot of trees so people can use charcoal. So I had applied to go on this trip and work on this project. And then what ended up happening is it got canceled because of COVID. So it didn't get canceled, but it was a virtual trip where we worked with people in Ethiopia who were college students to do the kind of research or look into the things that we were planning on looking into in person. So that was kind of the background on how I got involved. And then after the semester was over, which occurred after the trip, we kind of looked into the data that we had collected during winter break and saw what we had found. And I was still really interested in learning more about the impact of cook stoves. So the company that you mentioned, in Industries, it was just accompanied by two Carleton professors, and they make cook stoves that burn sustainable biochar made from waste products rather than charcoal. So the idea is that people can use these stoves, and it produces less things that are bad to inhale for the people cooking, but also it's made out of waste products such as coffee grounds rather than charcoal. So I was really interested in working with this project, and I reached out to my professors after the semester was over, asking if I could continue to work on it. And so that turned into an independent study the next semester. And then during the summer, I ended up working with them on kind of just overall with the company, redesigning their website, working on grant proposals, continuing to look at the data that they had collected in previous years. So some of the data that I ended up looking at included how having sustainable cook stoves impacted how people were experiencing respiratory discomfort when they were using these cook stoves rather than charcoal. And I also looked at data looking at how these cook stoves could help decrease deforestation rates.
Okay, so that was like that's what you spent time looking at, and like your the goal. Okay, so let's just extremely broadly in your time at the company, were you guys able to make the impact that you were looking for, which is replacing it with these more biodegradable cooked like these more biodegradable stoves, like with those coffee grounds and all that? Were you guys able to do that and eliminate some of those open fire cooking practices?
So I would say that I was working maybe a total of a little over a year on the project, and it's something that's ongoing and
Oh,
has
okay,
been
that's great.
much longer than I was a part of it, because Carleton professors were helping manufacture the cook stove and design the cook stove. But while I was there, some of the work that I think we did in looking into how these cook stoves would help decrease deforestation. We're going into a grant proposal so that they could continue to get funding to improve the cook stoves. We also were adding parts of the website which would allow people to sponsor cook stoves and allow people to buy them that necessarily it's a large upfront cost as
Yeah.
compared to charcoal cooking, so help uh, kind of bridge that gap. And then we also, while I was on campus, we were working on physically improving the cook stove. So I know that we ran a couple of tests looking at if they functionally cooked, because those are the little things that you don't necessarily think about. But what's the size of the flame? How long does it take to boil a pot of water? Those are all things that are really important if you're asking people to switch over to what is initially a more expensive method of cooking.
Hmm. Okay, so let's just jump out to just in general. So you have this experience with like, so you start off as an econ major, you're in pre-med, you're going like you're working in medicine right now, and then this thing, it feels like, okay, how, okay, I know there's a lot of people like you. I'd say I'm in there too. Like you seem to be interested in so many different things. How would you like what would you say for people who are also looking to do that, right? Like they don't want to just stay, okay, all right, in college I'm gonna major in biology and then I'm gonna go to pre-med and then I'm gonna maybe open up my own practice one day. You're like look at you, you're econ major, helping the environment, you're doing all these different things on top of medicine. What would you say people can do to continue like rather than just abandoning all these other interests for the one major one? How can people balance it all? How did you balance it all?
Sure. I think I'll speak more using myself as an example. I know that this won't carry over to other people necessarily one to one, but I, the entire time I've been pursuing different things, I have thought of them as kind of interactive with each other. For example, I think taking humanities classes, taking social sciences, and taking econ actually um, improves how I approach medicine. Because medicine, initially just seems like treating people for whatever they're sick with, right? That or helping provide healthcare. But providing healthcare is a lot more complicated than people just showing up to the doctor and then getting diagnosed, getting whatever medicine they need, getting whatever imaging they need, and leaving. Getting to the doctor is also part of providing healthcare, and that's really complicated in most places. A lot of places that means long wait times, a lot of places that means economic barriers, cultural barriers, things like that. So learning about economics is actually, I would say, helped me in understanding what are the barriers that are present in healthcare. And I think that's really important for people who are entering the medical field to understand. Because if you're not cognizant of what a patient is thinking, what is available, what resources are available to a patient, I don't think that you can provide proper medical care. So that includes understanding how the insurance system works, understanding what Medicare is, what Medicaid is, what difficulties people who are in nursing homes face. So understanding all of that, I think, and starting to learn about those things, I think only make you better suited for the medical field. So speaking, this is to my experience. Everything that I have been interested in have kind of funneled into my understanding of how I want to be a physician. And I think that including the environment, especially environmental issues, are going to impact people's health more and more as time goes on. I was talking about how charcoal cooking impacts respiratory health. Understanding that and understanding that certain populations might be more affected than others is only going to make you a better physician. So I think being well-rounded makes for better interests and better careers, despite what you're doing.
Yeah, no, it's going out in the chat too. I've economics and medicine and social service tying. Okay, so social service still somewhat struck me, right? Doctors Without Borders, but tying economics to the medicine, that just never ever came to my mind. That's a really interesting perspective that you have. And honestly, now I want to know, what are your plans on, like, for yourself? Because you're going into med school, but then pretty soon you're going to be out and you're going to be a practicing physician. So what are your plans to integrate all this stuff that you've learned about, like how getting to the doctor is one of the hardest parts of trying to seek healthcare and all this? How do you plan on integrating it with your own like medical practice?
I think I don't necessarily have a grand master plan of how
Oh,
all of this is going to come together. But I think my idea is that if I continue to learn about all of these things as time goes on, once opportunities present themselves, or once I see an opening where I maybe am well suited for, and maybe it's just talking to patients on a one-on-one basis is where it comes in. Having all of this knowledge and understanding is going to come together and be useful on its own. I think that it's not necessarily that I'm going to go into healthcare in a sense that I'm not going to be a physician, which I think is a path that some people take who have similar interests as me. But I also think that maybe it just means that when I am a physician and I'm talking to patients, I understand that this is a barrier, and maybe I'm more aware of how I can work around that, even for an individual patient. But it also might be that a hospital I'm working for is looking for someone specific who has a little bit more knowledge, or is looking to talk about it, and I can volunteer myself for that kind of role in addition to whatever I'm doing. So I think it's not necessarily that it's all going to come into one grand scheme, but necessarily it's just going to evolve and inform how I go on in my career.
so what would you say are your, so of course no grandmaster plan, but you've got your whole life ahead of you. Would you say you have any goals for what you're looking to accomplish in your career in medicine or even outside of that? And like what, like, I think more importantly, what, like, if you know, what kind of an impact are you looking to make?
Sure. I think that I think I can't necessarily say that I
Okay.
know exactly what I'm going to be. I mean, I've committed to going into medicine and I'm interested in that, and that's what I want to do. So I think I'm going to take the next couple years before and during med school to explore what specialty I like, what subspecialties do I like. Do I like being more in a community setting? Do I more enjoy being in a rural setting? Do I want to be very specific? Do I want to go into family practice? All of those things, I think exploring what I like is something that I'm prioritizing in the short term, so that in the long term, I can kind of figure that out. But I also think that I have in college prioritized kind of community involvement, whether that be fundraising or reaching out to communities, things like that, volunteering, things where I can kind of get involved with the people around me. So I think that regardless of what I'm doing, I would like to continue to do things like that, even if it's not the main track I'm on, but maybe little things on the side.
Okay, so you're not okay. So even though, like, of course, like a lot of people end up doing this, right? It's like you might do this stuff in college, but you go into medicine, and then you forget all of it. Your plan is, it's an amazing one at that, at least in my personal opinion. You want to go and like continue doing all this, like your efforts towards just like working with cultural organizations, helping people around the world, like you did with Aniga, and just like really working towards that sense of community that you seem to have been building since almost high school. Like that's really really impressive. Then I want to tie back to one thing. I've heard before from many people, and this is just a bit of a topic change, that even when working in the professional space, one of the biggest things that's helped them out is their history in sports. And you played sports, you have a pretty illustrious career, team MVP. How has that like helped you with both leadership, but more so because leadership generally isn't the issue? How has that helped you a lot more with teamwork and just developing yourself in that way?
Sure. I mean, I think the thing with, I mean, I was never a pro athlete. I mean, I was a swimmer growing up, and that was kind of a big thing when I was at home. And then I ended up playing water polo on a club team in college. But I think more than anything, it was a stress reliever. And also, I think being on a team, not just in teamwork, but it was kind of a way to force me to do something active and take a break from other things. And I think that spending time and focusing on something for yourself and also physical health is helpful to having better mental health as well. So I think it was great for teamwork in the sense that I was interacting with people and learning to communicate in short time frames and all of that, and learning from people who know more than me and teaching people who are coming on new to teams. But also, it was just a great stress reliever.
So would you say the biggest advantage you got, like, and the biggest thing you got from playing water polo was just that bit, just that it was going to be that stress relief for you? Like a lot of people play it because like they want to like at least people in my school, right? The reason one of the biggest reasons they play sports, they want to learn how to work better in the team, but it tends to cause like when some of my friends who are on the football team, it tends to cause them even more stress than taking away. But for you, your experience was that it took away stress.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it depends on what level you're playing. I mean, getting a college scholarship to a D1 school is different than playing on a team for fun in college. So I think that maybe sports is tied to different things for different people, and people in different circumstances have different importances. But I think in the circumstances that I was on a sports team, it was honestly just a way to have fun and be around people who are enjoying doing the same thing as me.
And that's wonderful to hear that, like, in this day and age when everything always seems to have a purpose, that it's just relax, have fun. I know it's a great thing to always have something like that in life. Okay. One thing that I personally want to know, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people would too, because I've never understood it. You're taking a gap year. What made you want to do that? Like,
So, I mean, I would say first of all, gap years are currently super common in the medical, like in going into medical school. I would say most people I know aren't directly going into medical school, and uh, the average is at least taking a couple gap years before medical school, nationally currently. And I think part of that is because building clinical experience is really important, or building research experience. Just having some time to build job experience is important right now. But also, I think personally for me, I had that kind of unique circumstance of a lot of my college experience being overshadowed by COVID. So some of the experiences maybe I would have had in a hospital setting, I kind of missed out on, such as volunteering or shadowing, things like that, that I did a little bit of before COVID, but I couldn't necessarily do while the pandemic was going on. So I tried to get involved in other ways that weren't in the hospital setting, but COVID definitely impacted how I approached taking a gap year. But I also think that I've learned so much just working in the past few months that you can't do just shadowing a couple days or a couple weeks out of the year. Being involved and understanding the healthcare system, I've learned a lot just by being a constant observer on a daily basis.
You know what you said about shadowing, right? I personally know a decent amount of people who did a lot of shadowing, but generally it tends to go overlooked. What would you say, like, your personal opinion on the benefits, like how impactful it is on you as a person, and just like, would you recommend that med students all like take time to shadow?
Yeah. I mean, one thing is, I think that shadowing or volunteering is kind of mandatory right now as far as applications go for
Yeah.
med school. But I also think that it's silly to go into a career without having any understanding of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. I think going into medicine is a pretty big commitment. It's a lot of school. It's money into school. It's time commitment. It's commitment of effort. It's not the easiest thing to commit to. So without seeing what that looks like, what the job actually is, without having an understanding of what the day to day looks like, I don't think people should commit to that without understanding what that looks like and whether that's a good fit for them personally.
Okay. All right. Well, I okay. I just kind of want to pop back on this. I've kind of asked similar questions to this, but this one isn't as like the last few questions I asked on this topic were a bit restrictive. I just want to know, like, over the next couple of years, where do you see yourself? Like, it could be however long you want. Well, you could answer for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever length you feel comfortable talking about. Where do you see yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, and generally, I think I've always tried to think not too much in
Mhm.
the sense that that commits me to the long term. I think in the short term, I see myself going to medical school, and right now I'm kind of working towards that and pursuing that through observing and working and doing all of that. And the thing about applications and then going to a school is it's not that you have to make a ton of decisions right after another. Whereas I think someone who is not necessarily going into more school after college does with their career. So I think in at least in the next few years, I see myself pursuing medicine, which is what I expected to be doing.
Mhm. All right. Um, so then I think I don't have many more questions about your future, right? But I want to go back to just kind of more a what if question. If you could go back before Carleton, before your gap year, before Exeter, like let's say we go back to all the way to 5 years old
Mhm.
and you could do it all over again, would you do anything differently?
I think it's I think it's hard to say that I would. I feel pretty comfortable with um, the things that I've done. I think that maybe any experience that I have now is created by the experiences that I've had in the past. So I can't say that I necessarily regret one thing or anything like that. And I think really I haven't made too many huge decisions other than where I'm going to high school, where I'm going to college. So I think that I would be a very different person if I hadn't made those decisions. But I can't say that I would go back and then change what I did because I think that I have liked where those decisions have brought me as a person.
Okay, so then if you don't like, okay, so then that's, first of all, just want to point out that is amazing. There's a lot of people, no, there's very few people who'll be able to say the same thing as you. Most people will take the approach, they'll like, when I've asked this question to just random people before, they'll look for the like nitpicky things which they would go back and change. Like, of course, sometimes people will make jokes like, "Oh yeah, if I could go back, then I would invest in," and that's of course different. But I really like how you're focusing on the fact that like you're not going in for the really small types of things. You're just going in and like every experience been through has made me into who I am today, and you're not looking to change any of it. That's really admirable.
I think
I
that
mean,
it's
yeah,
just not necessarily, I don't think it would make me very happy if I looked back on the past 10 years of my life, 20 years of my life, which is my whole life, I guess. But if I looked back on it and looked at every little thing that I could change, mostly because you can't go back and change them. So looking at them, unless it's directly informing what you're doing in the future, I think will likely only cause stress that isn't productive in any way.
yeah, no, it's. I think that's been an extremely recent leading cause of depression that people are just like as they grow older, especially through the pandemic, they were like, what am I doing now? I'm stuck at home and I should have done all these things before I got stuck at home, right? But when the pandemic was going on, that was a major thing that led to depression. So it's it's good that you think that way, especially already now, because there's a lot of people who already are regretting high school, college, things that they've done then. So I mean, then I guess there's only one thing left to ask. If someone wants to end up like you, someone wants to do the things like you do, or really just anything in general, where do you start?
I think that looking looking at people who have had experiences that you maybe want to be interested in, and then just talking about their experiences with them is really helpful. So I know my college has an alumni network. A lot of high schools will have the same thing, or maybe just someone's friend or anything like that. Someone who has done something similar to to what you're interested in, and just talking to them about what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, what were the positives, what were the negatives, everything. Just doing something like this, talking, sitting down and talking to someone, I think is a really great start. Just so you understand, is this something I want to do? What are the reasons I want to do it? And will this experience give me what I'm looking for?
Okay, well, with that, I'm gonna wrap it up because that's you've answered every question I had for you today with just some answers that I'm probably gonna spend the rest of the day thinking over. It's like the answers that you've given, they've definitely been impactful for me, and I'm pretty sure to anyone who is listening or who will be listening, it'll be impactful on them. This is you have a lot of insights, especially at like you've only lived through like barely a little over 20% of the average lifespan nowadays. So it's impressive how much of an insight you have now. I think with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been a wonderful experience having you here.
Thanks
And
for having me.
thank you so much. Yeah. And thank you guys all for coming out. It's been like really great to have you guys come here and listen to Eesha and just give her a wider audience for these words that she's been saying, because they're at the rate you're going already where you are today, you're going to change lives. And I can't wait to see that happen. With that, have a great rest of your Sunday.
You too.
Bye bye.